A whistleblower and a meeting earlier this year.
None of my family know about it. If anybody found out about it, then I'm out of a job.
A stretch of track so unsafe that lives may be at risk.
It could derail. You'd have fatalities. Definitely.
Undercover on Britain's railways.
Big issue! Network rail staff! Don't do the job properly!
In a job more risky than we could have imagined. Money going down the drain. And into the back pocket.
Credit card, me up, baby!
And all the time, the threat of an accident around the corner.
To my untrained eye, that looks potentially dangerous.
To my trained eye, it looks dangerous.
This is Danny Penman. He's a journalist working for the BBC, but for the past few months, he's been living a double life. He's been working as a trackman on Britain's railways and filming undercover at the same time. Earlier this year, we got a call from this man. He told us he had inside information he wanted to give us. He wanted his name and even the meeting place kept confidential. We've changed his voice to protect his identity. He said he'd been a track inspector on Britain's railways for 20 years and become so worried about safety that he decided to risk his job and talk to us. He said that potentially dangerous faults on the track are often not fixed for months, especially if fixing it means closing a line.
If it gets to the stage where it's going to delay trains or stop trains, that's when you start banging your head against a brick wall. People don't want to stop trains. They don't want to slow trains down. They just want to keep them running and running and running. It's frightening. It's frightening.
Are you the only person who feels like this?
Definitely not. There are a lot of others who would like to come out and talk, to tell people what's really happening in the industry, but they're frightened to talk to the press.
He was anxious to get away and said he couldn't tell us anymore. It was up to us to investigate.
Get right into the heart of it and get the truth out. Let the public see what's happening.
Danny started finding out about jobs, looking for work as a track maintenance man, even though he knew nothing about the railways. It was a huge target. Britain's rail network is more than 10,000 miles long. Two other BBC journalists, Pervez Khan and Dylan Tweddle, would be working with Danny undercover. They also started to investigate the safety record of the rail industry.
They've asked me to work undercover as a trackman. My first thought is it safe? I mean, I'm sure that as a passenger on a train you're a lot safer than you would be in a car, but working as a trackman, I really don't know. It's not something that you hear much about.
One statistic hit home. More than 100 people have been killed on the railways in the last 7 years alone.
6 people have died in the worst rail crash in a decade.
2 mainline trains have collided on the lines into Paddington.
Every major rail disaster seemed to be followed by a public apology and a promise that it must never be allowed to happen again.
I have safety as priority 1, priority 2, priority 3.
When it did, it was often down to the state of the track.
Another railway tragedy, 7 people die, many are hurt.
And for the journalists, there was another sobering statistic. On average, 1 track worker is killed every 6 weeks.
4 railway workers were killed by a runaway wagon in Cumbria.
If they were going to get work on the tracks, they were going to need some good advice. Fortunately, this man agreed to help. We'll call him Graham. He'd worked on the railways for around 20 years, running gangs of track workers. He wouldn't reveal his identity, but he would help them to find work, even if they didn't look the part.
Hello. Hi.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, finally meet.
Let's have a look at your hands then. These hands are far too soft.
Yeah.
He told them that before they could get work, they'd need to find a rail company willing to pay for their training. That would get them their personal track safety or PTS card, essential to work on the tracks.
Have you got one of these cards with you?
That's one there. Now you show that every time you go on the track.
And he warned them just how dangerous the job would be.
A lot of people, and especially a lot of contractors, will cut corners. They'll be putting your lives at risk. It's an eye-opener.
Is there actually enough work?
There's enough work for everybody. They'll take anybody on.
Even us.
Have you got any labouring work on the railway available at the moment?
I take it, do you have what?
It was hard to persuade the rail companies to stump up the cash for the training that would deliver the precious track cards. But it turned out to be a waste of time trying to get work without them.
Hello?
Oh, hi. My name's Danny. He told me to call you. He said he sorted out some work for tonight for me and 3 other lads.
No. Are you the lad who hasn't got the track induction? You need the track induction, PTS, before you're allowed on the track.
It's just that phone was up this morning. So
That's talking out of his fucking arse, he knows fuck all.
But finally, Danny got a job with Network Rail and went off to be trained. He'd be based here at Guildford in Surrey. Dylan and Pervez were hired by a private rail contractor and sent up here to Derby for training with a company called Catalyst. At first, the training seems impressive. After 2 days, Dylan and Pervez sit an exam on safety, and the lecturer does everything by the book.
I'll be in the room all the time. You can ask me if you're not certain of the question. I cannot tell you the answer, and I will not tell you the answer. Okay? I won't even guide you towards it. Anyone caught cheating, I'll just take the paper off and we'll leave the room.
But as soon as Dylan and Pervez go out on the tracks for practical training with another lecturer, the rule book seems to go out of the window. This is Paul Johnson, the trainer, demonstrating how to remove a sleeper clip.
Wrong way to do it. Now we're going to show you.
Wrong way.
But that's the way everyone does do it. Now you're going to see the proper way to do it, and you're all going to have a go at this, right? And it is so fucking awkward, it's unbelievable.
The class get 2 days practical training out on the track, but that's 1 day too many for their lecturer.
My logic was to come here 1 day a week. My boss says, no, you've got to get them to do it on their own without your assistance. So that's why we're up here 2 days. Because, see, I'm always thinking about getting home.
We'd be finishing by 1 o'clock every day, even though our course was meant to last till 5 in the afternoon. And we would be finishing by 1 and he'd be off to the pub.
And down the pub, Paul Johnson let Dylan and Pervez in on what he really thought about the quality of workers which the rail contractors sent him to train.
There's always a load of fucking shit on the railway. Honestly, right, if you send the people that have come up here, I wouldn't work with them. I would not work with them. I wouldn't even entertain them in my gang.
Why?
They're fucking useless.
Johnson's clearly dubious about whether this man will get through the exam. He came here from India 18 months ago. His English is poor, and he's having trouble understanding crucial parts of the course.
I think of all of you, he's going to be the one who struggles on the exam tomorrow. On your test paper, you cannot...
In the exam the following day, the man isn't taking any chances. He's hiding his notes here under his jacket. The cheating couldn't have been more blatant. But he needn't have worried. It proved pretty hard to fail one of Paul Johnson's exams.
You put your name and your signature on the front, and you can start on your back. Don't talk amongst yourselves, we'll just pop in a room.
He simply gives out the papers and leaves for a few minutes.
In front of
The pupil Johnson was so worried about got every single question right. His teacher doesn't seem too surprised.
2 flash bastards in the class. And I think the flash bastards know who they are, don't you? 100%.
Bottom of the class was Dylan. It had been agreed that he would deliberately fail the exam. Just how far would Paul Johnson go to get him through? Johnson called him in and told him he needed 4 more right answers to pass the test.
Well, how many have I got?
28.
28. What do I need? 32? All right, I'll have a go. No, I'm just rubbish at tests. Mine goes.
First question. What is a wet bed? The answer is dirty ballast.
Think about filth.
Filth?
Think about filth. Another name for filthy.
Dirty?
Yeah. What? Dirty what?
Dirty tracks?
What's that stuff we have in between the sleepers?
What, the sleep? Oh no, what, between the sleepers? Yeah. Ballast? Dirty ballast.
Next question. Name 2 types of switches. The answer is...
What is it? 2.
Left hand and right hand.
Left hand and right hand.
Left hand, oh right, oh yeah. Left hand, what, left hand switch and right hand switch? Yeah. Is that 2, is it? Yeah. That'll do then, innit?
That was it. He passed.
You're all day otherwise. When he was waving his hands in the air and, you know, spoon feeding me these answers, I was finding it quite hard to keep a straight face, but, you know, you do have to keep in the back of your mind that, hang on, this guy is quite happily passing people through an exam and sending them out onto the tracks when they really don't know what they're doing.
We'd heard about a 22-year-old student, Michael Mungerman, who went to find work on the railways. His father told Danny it was just a holiday job to earn some extra cash. He'd got a night shift working on the tracks at Vauxhall.
He had a PTS training session done which lasted about 2 days, and that gave you basic training just to be able to walk on the track. On the night of October the 9th, he was asked to do something he wasn't trained to do, didn't know what to do, didn't understand, and take control of the tracks. And a train came through at 50 miles an hour and killed Michael. I wanted to stand up on the roofs and shout about what they did to Michael. Nobody wanted to listen. That's very hurtful. When Michael died, nobody knew about it. There wasn't one word in a national paper, television or anything. He was killed in secret almost. Yeah. And it was very advantageous that people die anonymously because it doesn't bring on publicity.
So by the time Danny Penman first started working for Network Rail in Guildford, he was feeling very apprehensive, especially when he got down on the tracks. The train seemed to come out of nowhere. So he was relieved when his controller of site safety, or COS, seemed to know what he was talking about.
Yeah. This is a down road.
Yeah.
Traffic's travelling from right to left at 70 mile an hour.
Okay.
It won't hit 70 mile an hour here.
The COS must give a safety briefing before a maintenance gang even steps on the track.
It is red zone working. The third rail, which is this rail here, is live at all times.
Yeah.
There's a horn. You must have heard
Then they all have to sign a form, saying they've understood what they've been told.
Method of warning is a horn.
But on day 2, Danny's new COS, John Eastwood, doesn't bother with the safety briefing.
COS, you got a whinge? Any questions?
We'll find out. Gonna get a COS briefing. So.
Danny's reduced to running down the track after Eastwood, trying to find out where it's safe to work.
It's just because I don't know the railways very much. I thought I was going to get a COS briefing. I thought we were going to get a COS briefing, you know, like a safety briefing.
Well, what else do you want to know then?
Because I don't know the railways very well. I just wanted, like, you know, to know where the dangers were and speed of the line, that kind of thing. So.
I don't know, 70 mile an hour. Place of safety's over there.
Okay.
Don't touch the juice rise to go out. And don't go out in there 6 foot, where he is.
Okay.
Just stay in the 4 foot so he blows you out and into the step. Alright.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know.
Yeah. Just want to make sure there's nothing definite I've missed, you know?
Like what?
I don't know. But
Often Danny would be told by his bosses to sign the form, saying he'd received a safety briefing when he hadn't.
I haven't had my COS briefing yet. Does it matter?
Just sorry, and then John will give you it.
Oh, right, okay.
Other trackmen told him if he didn't sign it, he wouldn't get paid.
9.7 miles an hour.
Pervez Khan also started work on the tracks. He found work with the rail contractor Ganymede. They had a contract to provide labour to Network Rail for maintaining the Reading line. He'd be working night shifts and trying to stay out of danger. This is the Ganymede foreman, Ashley Arthurs. He's the one on the right, nodding off. He's been down the pub all afternoon and most of the evening. He's had so much to drink that when he waits, his speech is slurred.
I'm telling you now, Sonny, alright? We've got a couple of hours. Fairly upright.
During training, everyone was warned that drinking is a very serious offence in the rail industry, which operates alcohol restrictions nearly as strict as airline pilots.
You've got a couple of hours here, yeah, if that? That's our fucking couple of sleep. I'll tell you finally.
One of Ashley's responsibilities is the safety of all his workers, but he isn't going to be much help tonight. 5 nights later, and Pervez is on shift again. Before starting, he's worried as his temporary track card is out of date, and his permanent card hasn't arrived, so he shouldn't be working.
During our training, we were told that each time we'd go out on a shift, we'd have to take these cards with us. These were proof, and our supervisors would have to make sure they checked these cards before we were allowed to go on the track.
The cards are proof that the workers are trained and know what they're doing, but Pervez needn't have worried. The night passes and no one seems to care who he is or whether he has a card or not.
It's nearly 5 in the morning now. Just finished my second shift with Ash's gang. For the second day running now, my PTS card hasn't been checked. I could have been absolutely anybody. For the last 2 days, no one's checked. Not even the Network Rail supervisor.
The next night, Pervez turns up on shift. He's told to unclip sleepers from the rails. Again, no one checks his cards. So tonight he decides to own up to the Network Rail controller of site safety that his track card is out of date.
Right, okay, it's your temporary Sentinel card, is that?
Yeah, expired 2 days ago, I think.
Right, okay, issue date 30th of the 4th. So, how long are they for?
10 days. Well, it says there, 10 days.
Right. Right, all you have to do is sit in the van, alright?
The Ganymede foreman, Ashley Arthurs, has sobered up since his drinking session a few nights ago. He's now one man down, and he's not pleased.
Oh, you fucking brain. Fuck's sake. Let's sit in the van. You got the keys? Yeah, sit in the van, mate.
But a few minutes later, Pervez gets new instructions.
5 minutes ago, I was told that I'm unauthorised to go on the track. Yeah, I've just got a phone call telling me to come onto the track.
His card's invalid. Pervez shouldn't be on the track at all, but they need someone to do the job. So the Network Rail controller of site safety accepts the card anyway. So does the Ganymede foreman, Ashley Arthurs.
Take up the other one, yeah, but as long as you've got a card on you, that's fine. That's alright, his mouth's moving, look.
Several weeks later, it was reported that 2 more track workers had died working on the railway in Staffordshire. To Danny and Pervez working undercover, the safety of trackmen never seemed to be very high on the list of priorities. Danny decided to tackle the depot manager about this, though if he protested too much, he could blow his cover. The manager was angry there being no safety briefings, but seemed to think that there was little he could do.
I don't like things like that, because ultimately I want a conscientious professional workforce.
Yeah.
And if they can't do the job conscientiously and professionally, I'd rather someone who did.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to, because everything you lot do reflects on me.
Yeah.
Because ultimately you're my blokes and it's my head, not yours. Because they'll go for me first, then they'll move down the ranks.
Week 2 at Guildford, and Danny is back on shift. He discovers that it's not just workers that need to worry about safety, So do passengers. He'd been taught that when a train hurtles down a track, the margin between a safe journey and catastrophe can be small. Down here on the rails, it's about 4 inches. That's the length of the clips which secure the rail to the sleepers. He's working with John Eastwood again when he notices that a clip, sometimes called a key, is missing.
There's a key missing. Sorry to be a pain, but there's one of the chairs has got a key missing.
No. You got one in your pocket?
No.
One don't matter, does it?
Yeah, what it is there's 2 next to each other. There's like one from one side and then one from another.
Yeah. I can't do nothing about it. I ain't got no more with me.
Okay. Do I need to report it or?
No, yeah, you've reported it. Ain't got nothing to me.
Okay, alright.
It wasn't the first time this had happened. 2 days earlier, he'd found a sleeper spike so bent that it wasn't securing the rail to the sleeper at all. He tells John Eastwood.
This isn't clipped on properly. No.
Got a hammer?
No.
It's not clipped on properly. It might be clipped on properly then. What's up with it then?
What?
What's up with it?
It's not clipped on properly, the rail.
What about that one behind you?
Half clipped on.
There you go. That's better than none, isn't it? You want to put it right?
I haven't got the tools. It's just it might jump or something, I don't know.
Jump. Has it jumped since we've been here?
I don't know, I haven't been watching it that closely. But is it safe? I don't know.
No, it's not safe, you're right. Should be put right.
Danny wasn't sure how many clips needed to be missing before it was a problem. He needed to check it out with an experienced railwayman.
That's why I keep trying.
He went back to Graham.
If you had 2 sets of clips missing, how unsafe is that?
It's not very satisfactory, but it's not unsafe. You'd really need 4 or 5 in a row missing. Then that would be a problem.
Danny decided to go back and look at the Guildford line more closely. Trains would still be running, so he took Dylan as a lookout. They took a ladder with them to climb over the locked gate. They didn't need it.
Bloody hell, this is open.
As trainees, they'd been told that it's a sacking offence to leave a gate like this unlocked.
1 set of clips.
There were 8 pairs of clips in a row which weren't holding the rail to the sleepers.
8.
Graham had said that 4 sets of defective clips in a row would be unsafe.
Finally, that one there is clipped on. Bloody hell. 6, 7, 8.
Then he found more.
Is that a train, Dylan? Yep. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's 14 sleepers that aren't holding the rail in place. Just before that, I found a stretch of 8 sleepers that weren't holding the rail in place. In this 20 or so yard stretch, there is just 1 clip holding the rail. We were told that 4, it needed to be repaired.
We were worried about holding onto this information in case an accident happened.
Shall I give you very precise?
I was going to say, yeah, can you give me some more specific details of exactly?
Yes, it's on the down line of the Wanborough to Farnborough line.
So what?
Fortunately, there's a confidential phone line for rail workers to report problems anonymously. Danny could call them without blowing his cover.
If you can imagine a couple of 100 tons of train travelling 80 mile an hour on an unstable rail, it's not...
They said they'd report the unsafe track to Network Rail. It would be another month before Danny could return to the Guildford line to see if it had been fixed. We'd been working undercover for 6 weeks when we got a call from the Whistleblower. He said he wanted to meet us on the tracks where he worked. It was agreed Danny should go. The Whistleblower was nervous of our cameras and afraid we'd be discovered.
I actually told my wife I was out on a night shift. I'll have to stay out all night and go back in the morning as if I'd been working all night.
He then took Danny along a track. He was looking for something. Eventually he found it. To us, this looked like just any other stretch of line. But the inspector believes this rail is in such poor condition that lives may be at risk.
This rail here is on a curve. When a train goes round a curve, the force of the wheels grinds away the side of the outside rail, making it narrower and narrower. We measure how narrow it is by putting this gauge on top of the rail. A good rail should have a wide gap between the top of the rail and the gauge, like here. But look here. This rail is so ground down that there's only a narrow gap.
My God, you can feel the way that metal's just been ground away. That's really frightening.
It's very risky. It could derail.
How fast are trains on this particular line?
Well, I think it's about 85.
So what would happen if a train was derailed at 85 mile an hour on this curve?
You'd have fatalities. Definitely.
We couldn't report this without revealing the identity of the whistleblower, because only he and a very few others would know about it. But he was insistent that he'd been reporting it to his rail contractor for months.
It has been reported.
And what's happened?
Nothing. I think there should be a speed restriction on this bit of the track at the moment, but there isn't. Keep the trains running. Don't slow them down. Any train delays will cost money.
He wanted to explain how it was that he'd ended up talking to us, because everything else he'd tried had failed.
They don't want you to talk to the press, because you'd be letting the cat out of the bag. We're not allowed to do that.
But he believed it had got to the stage where an accident could happen on his watch, and he'd be called to account.
It's all down to money. You're there to make trains run, regardless of the track, because we've no say in the matter any longer. We're here just to do our bit. Go home and think, okay, that's all right, until a fatality happens. Then you're in the dock.
If a speed restriction isn't placed on this line, what could happen?
I would dread to think what could happen. Dread to think.
We needed to be sure that the whistleblower was right. So we contacted one of the railway's most respected figures. Professor Brian Clementson is a safety expert and former director at British Rail and Virgin Trains. Danny showed him the evidence he'd gathered from the track inspector.
He's a professional on site whose job is to inspect the track. He's right to be concerned. Whether or not it might have caused a derailment is very hard for me to say, but clearly the sideway had reached a limit at which some action should have been taken. And I'm quite concerned that no speed limit had been applied to that piece of track to slow down the trains.
After several weeks working with the track gang at Network Rail, Danny's double life was proving difficult to balance. He needed to stick to the rules, but also stay in with the gang. And things were about to become much more difficult.
I've just finished my day shift at the Guildford depot. It was a fairly typical day, but then we went back to the depot. Something quite extraordinary happened, where my boss pulled something out of his pocket.
John Eastwood had picked up a wallet containing these credit cards. It was probably thrown from a train by a thief who stole the cash out of it first.
Is that just on the side of the track?
Have it clean up. Do you know how much was in that fucking wallet? £1 fucking coin. I've got fucking 20 credit cards. That ain't no good to me, is it?
But it is to this man, Paul Bennett.
See, I've got you. We put in soap and water, just fresh them up.
Yeah.
That'd be a good one. That would 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 be a good one.
Yeah.
This is the best one. Just do one. Wow.
Ah, it's blank.
Yeah.
The only card you want really to clean up.
4 days later, Bennett boasts he's already used one of the credit cards. and others are being passed to another member of the gang.
Oh, that Mark Spencer's one, good one. One's at 2006.
That's expired.
Where?
05,
9. Money, money, money! Must be funny! I don't know when that runs out, that one. 05.
The wallet also contained a loyalty card from Boots.
Yeah, when the fuck are you going to use an Advantage card? Boots. So if you get... Yeah, they'll get the points.
Yes, right.
You won't get them.
Yeah, but... Oh, I don't know. What's
you know,
that?
they're nectar cards, you take petrol points. You won't get them. If you get points,
yeah, let me
only go on their account.
Let me just have them anyway.
Don't be thick. Credit card me up, baby. No, that's the one that's going to get you money.
Yeah, because they ain't got a signature. You can make a signature unless you study them. And
Danny had already been offered a card once and managed to bat it off, but he knew that refusing it again risked drawing attention to himself. Soon afterwards, it happened.
Get the windows on, mate.
take off, mate. £5 in the end each card.
What's that?
£5 in the end each card.
Too risky for me, mate.
You want it black?
Don't take risks.
You only want it black, silver. Black and silver we've gone for.
Are you going to use them?
I've already used them.
What for?
Only that one.
Which one?
That gold card, I look gold.
Oh, this, what did you use it for?
I don't know what I looked at, it just...
What?
No, is it now?
I'm just surprised you can get away with it, that's all.
Why couldn't you?
I don't know. You just get caught, don't you?
How?
Later, we'd report this to the police.
Yeah.
With every new shift, Danny's relationship with his controller of site safety, John Eastwood, was getting worse. Like the day the gang has to shovel ballast onto this embankment. The stones here are pushing up against these electricity cables.
Isn't that just going to squash those retaining posts and knock it all over?
Good, they're not my retaining posts, are they? Did they worry about kicking my ballast down, did they? Look, here it was down there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it might knock all the electrics out or something.
That'd be alright.
I'm only looking after taxpayers' money. Sorry, I'm just looking after taxpayers' money, that's all.
What for? You paying any tax, are you?
Yeah, of course.
He's a spy.
I'm not. I just...
I'll bet you it's a mirror or something like that. This is what I've done on the railway for 3 months, isn't it?
And I thought, oh shit, that was a really stupid thing to say, talking about taxpayers' money. Most people on the tracks don't ask that many questions. They certainly don't talk about taxpayers' money all day.
Over the next few days, Danny tries to keep a low profile, but the gang just gets more suspicious.
They'll think you're from News of the World, Dan.
News of the World. So why the News of the World?
Oh, it's Sun.
Why the Sun?
Dad, just come clean with us. We'll give you a good white up.
Where are you from, really?
Originally, I'm from Liverpool.
Guildford Gazette.
Yeah.
Metro Weekly. Big issue! Network rail staff! Don't do the job properly!
They even think he might be a spy from the rail union, the RMT.
What are you? Are you a newspaper reporter? You're someone from the RMT to come see what we do? Or... What are you on about, Dan? Are you...
What the RMT sent someone?
It'd be
Network Rail, send them.
Network Rail, high up. Or high up. One of those three.
Where did you get these ideas from?
Yeah, but you can tell because you keep on shrugging it off. Where do you get these ideas from?
What one of them three from?
If you give us some money, we'll tell you the real story about the railway.
It looked like Danny's days in Network Rail were numbered.
We got more stuff. Pretty loud on which side.
Dylan, Pervez and Danny have been working undercover for nearly 2 months now, and they'd had a chance to see how some of the £5.3 billion invested in the railways this year was being spent. Not very wisely from what we saw. Nothing ever seemed to go quite right. At times, Danny was paid to do absolutely nothing.
But I have another cup of tea in a minute, I suppose. Looks like I've got a long day ahead.
Getting the right card for the job could be a slow process, and it seemed impossible to find Danny anything else to do.
I've had some, we've had them in the first couple of days, and others have had to wait 6 fucking weeks. So it really depends
I'm so fucking bored, mate.
And he wasn't the only one being paid to sit around.
You think they'd have us painting the station?
I was going to get the broom just now and sweep this room out. Fucking so bored.
They must lose a fortune, Network Rail, doing this.
Well, you thought they'd got their act together now, didn't you?
Yeah.
It's taken them a few years and they still ain't got it right, so...
And if it wasn't the lack of cards, it was the lack of tools. We went to this site in the Midlands, run by one of Britain's largest railway contractors, Carillion. Before laying these drainage pipes, the gang have to dig a trench by the side of the track. But they can't start it because a vital piece of equipment is missing.
I've got no fucking shovels, got some shovels and stuff coming, but... Oh, there, didn't you? We ain't got nothing, man. We've got no shovels, we could do the fucking job. You know what I mean? Oh, it's a fucking... 2 fucking shovels? This is a multi-million fucking pound company, you know what I mean? Mate, see you in a bit. Bye-bye.
This gang of 5 men stood around doing nothing for 2 hours before the shovels arrived.
It might only be a small fuck up, it can be a big fuck up, but there's always a fuck up. Or you're just sitting about like a spare prick waiting for something to fucking happen. Every fucking week. We come here the 1 week, never even got out of the van.
Even Network Rail admit that often only 50% of any one shift is actually spent working.
Hear it in the news. They've always been given another 20 million, another 5 million, because the system's going to get better and better and better. But you tell me where the system's getting better, because I can't see any improvement at all.
And the system doesn't seem to be getting better in Guildford today. At least, not very quickly.
I reckon we did about 15 or 20 minutes during the whole 8-hour shift. We had to wait for an hour and a quarter whilst one of the work gang gained possession of the track, as it's known.
What's the problem?
What Adie's tried to do, she's tried to sort out some sort of arrangement, which he's gone through his manager, and his manager's gone through our control. Our control have gone through to the signalling manager, and the signalling manager's authorised for them to do the 212.
Is it always so bureaucratic?
Yeah.
In the afternoon, we drove to a nice station in the country and parked up for an hour.
I reckon we've done about 3 hours work this week.
Nothing wrong with that.
I know. So will we get strung up if we go back early?
Yeah, you're not going back early, mate, no.
Okay, alright.
Why, what's up?
Nothing? Oh, no, nothing. It's nice here in the sun.
You can go back if you want, but it's on your head.
Don't want the boss shooting me.
He won't shoot you, mate, he's gone over.
On average, Danny worked just 3 hours a day in an 8-hour shift because the work schedule was so disorganised.
Be careful.
It had been a month since Danny had reported the defective clips on the track at Guildford. They must have been repaired by now. There was only one way to find out.
14.
Previously, he'd found 14 sleepers in a row not properly clipped to the rail. Now, it was worse.
16. That's 16 sleepers which aren't holding the track in place. This is absolutely ridiculous.
So he called the rail workers' confidential phone line again. This time, Network Rail had a confession to make. They couldn't find the right stretch of track, so could Danny take them there?
That they wanted you to walk the track with them to show them what it is that you're seeing. And obviously that breaks your confidentiality.
Danny was anxious about his cover being blown, but he decided to risk it. The following week he met the Network Rail track engineer. She was sympathetic towards him.
I'm obviously very concerned that you feel that no one's listening to you.
Yeah.
That's not on.
Yeah, okay.
Because everybody has the right to have their say.
Yeah.
And, you know, report things.
Yeah.
But this part of the world hasn't had that many track renewals.
Yeah.
Not as many as it should have had.
Yeah.
And so, slowly but surely it's going.
Yeah.
But at the time, I mean, I always have the analogy, it's like looking after an old lady with incontinence, and you've got to keep her going.
Yeah.
Without being too harsh.
Yes.
So that's 3, that's 4 there.
She marked each of the defected clips with chalk.
5, 6, 7.
She agreed that the job had to be done and apologised for not having repaired the track sooner. But she didn't think that a speed restriction was necessary.
I don't actually think this is compromising safety, so long as the patrolmen are briefed that they knock the spikes down as they come through, and it is unacceptable just to walk past and leave, what was it, 14 up in a row?
Yeah.
With them in a hole.
She left assuring Danny that the line would be repaired within 7 days. But we weren't sure if she'd done enough to make it safe.
Having so many spikes over an extended distance was of great concern to me. The rail is free to move vertically, and once a rail is free to move vertically under the weight or the passage of a train, it can also move sideways, and that would present a very risky situation.
Trackmen, boat work.
We were building an ever more detailed and disturbing picture of the state of the rail network. But still, no one working in the industry was prepared to talk to us openly. Then one day, we spoke to a new contact. He agreed to meet us.
You need us to get a medical assistant.
The icon of the railways north of the border, the 4th rail bridge in Edinburgh. This is Doogie Kinnear. He's been on the railways for 14 years. He inspects the track on the bridge, but these days he rarely gets on a train.
I try not to travel on trains. I use my car most of the time. I don't have confidence in a safe railway at all. I don't think we have a safe railway in this country.
Doogie had one big advantage over all his colleagues. He was about to leave the industry. He could speak out about his managers in a way that others couldn't.
I have tried to do something about this. I have raised concerns with management at various safety meetings, but I've seen no action taken. So this is probably the best way to get the message out there.
Doogie took us to railways north of the border. This is how he does most of his track inspections, from a Land Rover and at night.
Basically, you can't see. So at night, you're quite high above the track. You're a lot further away from it than you would be if you were walking along the track. You're looking at the track through a windscreen and you're looking 15 feet ahead. There's reflections, the spotlights on the Land Rover cause shadows.
These tracks used to be inspected in the day and on foot. Now it happens just once a month, and even then at night.
It could be possible to miss loose base plates, loose clips that fasten the rails to the base plates. It could be possible to miss a rail defect, a crack in a rail. If a defect's missed by a Land Rover, theoretically it's 3 weeks before it could be picked up by somebody on foot.
But Doogie's greatest fear about safety centres on the 4th rail bridge. It's a 150-foot drop to the Firth of Forth below. A serious derailment here would have devastating consequences. Doogie's one of the inspectors who checks this track at night. He thinks it's so unsafe that an accident could happen at any time. There was only one way he could show us why he was so concerned. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he took us onto the bridge when there was the least risk we'd be discovered.
I think if the travelling public knew about the state of maintenance on the bridge, we would have a lot of empty trains.
He believes these rails could push apart and cause a train to run off the track. The distance between the rails, known as the gauge, is kept constant by wooden wedges and metal plates. It might seem primitive, but it works, as long as track faults are put right after they've been reported by the track inspectors.
These wedges hold the timbers that the rails sit on in place.
So this, which just came out in my hand, is holding these rails in place?
Yeah.
And here's another one?
Yeah. If a wedge comes loose, obviously the vibration and weight of traffic could move the timber out the way, which would obviously widen the gauge. You rely on the wedges and the metal plates.
That's loose as well.
It's loose, yeah. That one's quite tight. There's another loose bolt on a plate.
What about these wedges?
Well, this wedge, that's, that isn't holding anything, and its opposite number has actually disappeared on the side of the timber.
To my untrained eye, that looks potentially dangerous.
To my trained eye, it looks dangerous. It is. I mean, you don't have to be knowledgeable on railway infrastructure to know that there's something wrong with that.
Does the management know about this?
Yeah, they do, because the guys that inspect the track, myself included, on occasion, come out once a week. We walk the bridge, both lines. We put our reports in. They obviously go back to management. They read them, and nothing's done.
What do you think the passengers would think if they knew the state of these clamps and these wedges?
I think the buses would be very busy.
At one time, one of the senior British Rail managers who had some responsibility for the maintenance of the Forth Rail Bridge was Brian Clementson. We showed him the footage.
I am concerned about that, and I think anyone watching it would be concerned. Some of those wedges were very loose, the bolts were loose, but more than that, there was no satisfactory explanation as to what was going to be done about it. And that would worry me even more, because with the heavier and more frequent trains that run over the bridge, the deterioration that would result and the increased risk that would arise from that needs urgent attention.
Once again, we rang the rail industry's confidential phone line. Coincidentally, it's based here in Edinburgh, and even the operator sounded worried about the state of the track.
I mean, you can hear it rattling when you go over it on a train.
Yes.
I'm quite concerned.
Yes.
I go on a train over that bridge very often.
You should be concerned, believe me.
Can I ask why you've made your report to Cyrus?
Because the normal internal routes for reporting faults seem to be failing.
Okay.
Nobody's listening.
The charge that nobody's listening is serious enough. But Doogie and his colleagues go much further. They say faults have actually been removed from the records without them ever being fixed. In September 2002, a coal train like this one derailed in Kincardine, a few miles away. An investigation showed the accident occurred because the tracks had spread apart. The paperwork showed that the rails were badly aligned and that inspectors had reported it nearly a year earlier. Just 1 week before the accident, computer records still showed that the fault had not been fixed. Within days of the derailment, the records had been changed.
The week after the derailment, when the sheets came out, that fault had disappeared.
Have you got any evidence that this is actually going on?
I do, yeah. These are from the Kincardine derailment.
Right.
This sheet here shows you the alignment poor, worse at joints.
Yeah.
That's the week before the derailment.
Right.
And this is the same sheet after the derailment, and the fault isn't there anymore.
Well, it's clearly disappeared.
Yeah, it has.
Why do you think it was removed from the database?
After a derailment, the Health and Safety Executive will have an inquiry into the reasons for the derailment, and I believe that that fault was removed to stop the Health and Safety Executive discovering that faults that could have contributed to the derailment had been previously reported.
Is there any other reason that these faults could have been removed from the database?
No.
We wondered if this had happened before. Doogie checked with his colleagues.
I don't see all the sheets every week. I only see the sheets for the bit of track I'm walking. And the guys on the other bits, they sometimes mention to me that faults have disappeared for their sheets.
Pervez, Dylan and Danny had been working on the railways for more than 3 months now. during which time they'd gathered evidence of bad practice, huge waste, potentially dangerous faults, and at least one attempt to hide these safety problems from the public. It was time to resign from their jobs and take our evidence direct to the rail companies. The company responsible for track maintenance in Scotland while we'd been working was First Engineering. We asked them why all traces of the track fault that caused the Kincardine derailment had been wiped from the records. They offered no explanation for how this might have happened. And they had nothing to say about the state of the Forth Bridge either. Catalyst, the training company based in Derby, were told how Paul Johnson had helped to cheat Dylan Tweddle through his exam. They said, Catalyst has clear standards in performance for all employees. Due to the seriousness of the allegations, Paul Johnson has been suspended from his duties while a full investigation takes place. We approached Ganymede track layers about their foreman Ashley Arthurs turning up drunk to work. They said, on being notified by the BBC that one of Ganymede's employees was in breach of our policy on the use of alcohol or drugs, the individual was immediately suspended from his duties. But Ganymede insisted it was the job of the Network Rail controller of site safety, and not their foreman Ashley Arthurs, to ensure that Pervez did not work without a valid track card. We asked Network Rail why, with one trackman dying every 6 weeks, John Eastwood and others failed to give safety briefings. They disputed the lack of briefings and were unaware of Danny's complaints to John Eastwood and the depot manager. We told Network Rail about the evidence of the missing and faulty clips on the line at Guildford. They insist it did not represent a risk to passenger safety. They said qualified and experienced staff were sent to the site. We confirmed that the issues identified did not present a safety risk and trains should continue to run as normal. But the Network Rail engineer had agreed the track at Guildford needed to be fixed within 7 days. Danny went back 2 weeks later to see if it had been done. We couldn't be sure if any work had been done. We found the clips the Network Rail track engineer had marked with chalk. 1 or 2 clips seemed to be more secure, but the rest was still not holding the rail properly, and some were so bent that it didn't look as if they'd been touched at all.
I've got no idea whether they've actually come up here and fixed this or not, but if this is what they call fixing, you know, I really wouldn't want to be a commuter on this particular line, that's for sure.
In conclusion, Network Rail said, we recognise that this programme could alarm viewers. We treat such allegations seriously. On the basis of the information provided, we have confidence that the track is safe and that train passenger safety has not been compromised. We wish to state in the clearest possible terms that safety of the railway and its operations is our highest priority. What we'd found while working undercover on the railways had been an eye-opener, and not just for us.
I found the whole thing very worrying and very concerning. And I hope that Network Rail will take this film as being a positive contribution to trying to improve things. The filming that's been done has been random in nature. It's not been set up in any way. I can only come to the conclusion that actually the kind of things we've seen in the film are probably more widespread than I'd hoped.
Dougie Kinnear is voting with his feet. He's had enough. He's handed in his track card. He's leaving the rail industry.
I'm glad to be out of it, definitely. I won't have to worry about it anymore. I won't miss stress, I won't miss frustration.
But for the whistleblower, little has changed. Although the worn rail was finally repaired, several months after he first reported it as serious.
When the film goes out, I do fear for myself and the other people who have spoken to you. But people who travel on trains, they should also be scared. I believe that there are worse areas than you're actually showing. You never know when an accident could happen. At the end of the day, it could happen tonight. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen next week.
If you have concerns about potentially dangerous or worrying practices in your workplace, the program makers would like to hear from you.